In the winter of 1944, something happened that wasn't supposed to be possible. A regiment of Black American soldiers held back an entire German armored division for 18 days straight. High Command hadn't sent them there to win. They'd sent them there to die. Instead, the impossible happened. They held the line when military strategists said they should have been slaughtered in hours. And when it was over, the United States Army did something remarkable. They erased it. They buried the story so deep that for nearly 80 years, most Americans didn't even know these soldiers existed. This is the story of the 761st Tank Battalion. This is the story that changed everything. And this is the story America tried very hard to forget. To understand how a nation could bury such heroism, you have to understand the America these soldiers came from. For 300 years, Black Americans had been told they were not quite men. The Constitution agreed. The law agreed. The military agreed. And yet, every time America needed soldiers, they called on black men to die in their defense. It was a grotesque dance. They were good enough to die, the thinking went, but not good enough to be seen dying. Their courage could be weaponized. Their humanity could not. By World War II, this pattern had been repeated again and again. The Revolutionary War, the Civil War. Each time black soldiers had shown up. Each time they'd been relegated to supply lines, labor battalions, anywhere but the front lines. When they came home, they found themselves back in the same cage, the same segregated neighborhoods, the same exclusion. In the South, Jim Crow had transformed black life into complete control. In the North, segregation was just coded differently. And in the military, segregation was law. Black soldiers couldn't eat with white soldiers, couldn't sleep in the same barracks, couldn't even donate blood to the same banks. Even blood was segregated. The message was clear: your blood is contaminated. By 1944, the war in Europe had become a meat grinder. Hundreds of thousands of Americans were already dead. The need for bodies was insatiable. And yet, the military remained committed to segregation. But desperation changes things. When your own soldiers are being killed by the thousands, philosophy becomes flexible. Someone in high command made a decision that would have been unthinkable years earlier. He decided to form a combat tank battalion, an all-black tank battalion. He called them the 761st Tank Battalion. The newspapers called them the Black Panthers. This was meant to be a test, and it was meant to be expendable. The 761st was trained in secret and shipped out to Europe in October 1944, assigned to the 101st Airborne Division. The 101st looked at the black tankers with barely concealed contempt, but the war didn't care about their feelings. By November, Hitler was running out of time. The Nazis were cornered and desperate. Hitler decided to gamble everything on one last offensive. He'd punch through American lines in Belgium, race toward the coast, and split the Allies in half. On December 16, 1944, the Germans attacked. The offensive caught Americans by surprise. German forces advanced further and faster than anyone expected. The Germans were driving toward Bastogne, a crucial supply hub. If they took it, the American position would collapse. The 101st Airborne was ordered to hold Bastogne at any cost, and they were given reinforcements, the 761st Tank Battalion. What nobody said out loud was what everyone understood. The 761st was being sent there to be slaughtered. Military officers had run the calculations. They saw this green regiment of black men against impossible odds. They saw a suicide mission. The real expectation was that they would die. That was their function. What happened next shouldn't have been possible. For 18 days, in temperatures below zero, with fuel running dangerously low and ammunition scarcer by the hour, the 761 Tank Battalion held the line. They didn't just hold, they counterattacked. They disrupted German supply lines. They shot it out with German tanks in the snow. When it was over, Bastogne was still in American hands. The German offensive had failed. Historians would later call it mathematically impossible. But it had happened. The problem was that it was too real. Too many people had witnessed it. The Germans had been there. The 101st Airborne had been there. You couldn't just make it disappear, or could you? What followed was a masterclass in historical erasure. The story that spread through America was carefully curated. The 101st Airborne had held Bastogne. General Anthony McAuliffe had given his famous response, "Nuts!" The narrative was clean, it was heroic, and it was very, very white. The 761st Tank Battalion, redacted. Files disappeared. Records were lost. When historians asked questions, they were stonewalled. It was as if the 761st had been ghosts all along. For decades, this worked. The American public never knew about the 761st. High school textbooks didn't mention them. Military histories omitted them. And the soldiers themselves? Many came home to a country with no gratitude to offer. They came home to segregated neighborhoods, limited job opportunities, communities where their service meant nothing. They died and bled for a nation that wouldn't let them eat at the same lunch counter as white citizens. The betrayal was incomprehensible. Some veterans tried to speak about what they'd done. They were met with indifference. In a nation struggling to maintain racial hierarchy, stories of black military excellence were dangerous. They undermined the entire structure of belief that justified segregation. The system knew instinctively that it had to suppress this history. It couldn't acknowledge that black soldiers had been crucial to American victory. Because if their sacrifice had mattered, then their humanity mattered. And the system wasn't ready to admit that. For nearly 80 years, the story stayed buried. Then, in the early 2000s, historians began digging. Veterans advocates began asking questions. They found documents the military thought were destroyed. They interviewed aging veterans. They pieced together fragmented records, and slowly the truth emerged. The 761st Tank Battalion hadn't just participated in the Battle of the Bulge. They were essential to its outcome. Without them, Bastogne might have fallen. In 2017, 73 years after the battle, the U.S. Army officially recognized the 761st Tank Battalion. They were awarded a streamer for combat excellence. It was too late for many. They'd lived their lives in obscurity, watching white soldiers from the 101 become legendary. But here's what makes this even more important. The 761st wasn't unique. The Tuskegee Airmen had the best combat record of any fighter group in Europe. They were nearly forgotten. The 92nd Infantry Division suffered over 3,000 casualties in Italy. Their story was redacted from official histories. The 366th Combat Team liberated towns across Italy and was erased too. Again and again, black military units were forced to do the impossible, then forbidden from claiming credit. The system didn't just discriminate. It lied. What does it mean to erase the heroism of people already marginalized? It means rewriting the foundation of national identity. It means teaching children a version of history that's not incomplete, but actively false. It means saying to black Americans, your sacrifice doesn't count. Your bravery doesn't matter. The real scandal isn't that they were forgotten. The real scandal is that there was anything to forget. A just society wouldn't have had to erase them. Yet invisibility has limits. Stories buried underground sometimes claw their way back to the surface. Every document discovered, every veteran who tells their story, every historian who refuses to let the official narrative stand. These are acts of resurrection. The 761st came back. The truth came back. And now, when you read about the Battle of the Bulge, you know there were black tanks on that frozen landscape. You know their names. You know their price. The 761st didn't need history to validate them. They knew what they did. They paid for it in blood. They lived with the knowledge that their nation didn't care about their contribution, didn't see them as full human beings, and yet they did it anyway. That's what makes their story so powerful. It's not about winning, it's about resilience in the face of systematic dehumanization. It's about courage that comes not from expectation of reward, but from internal necessity. Now we have a choice. We can let this story fade back into obscurity, or we can learn from it. We can recognize it as evidence of what human beings are capable of when forced to confront impossibility. We can ask ourselves what other stories we've been taught to forget, what other contributions we've been taught to ignore. The 761st reminds us that history isn't inevitable. It's constructed, it's chosen, and we have the power to choose differently. The price of freedom isn't measured in battles won. It's measured in the stories we refuse to let die. It's the refusal to let our nations erase us, no matter how much power they have. It's the insistence that truth matters, that sacrifice matters, that every human being matters, even when the world is conspiring to tell us otherwise. The 761st held the line. They did the impossible. And now, finally, we're beginning to remember.